exam syllabus. This chapter basically discusses major contents of labor law, Bangladesh labor law. So we started the chapter in our last class. Just a quick revision, we started discussing about how Bangladesh labor law came into action, or a very brief history of Bangladesh labor law. Then we get introduced to different chapters of Bangladesh labor law. After that, we started talking about different chapters of Bangladesh labor law. For instance, in chapter 2 of Bangladesh labor law, it basically talks about conditions of employment there, and then we talked about different how Bangladesh labor law classifies employees. So, according to Bangladesh labor law, there are different categories of employees. So we talked about what we mean by apprentice, badli, casual employee, temporary employee, probationer, and permanent employee. After that, we talked about probation period, and we say varying from like white collar or blue collar employee. In some cases, we have a probation period for 3 months, and in some cases, we have probation period for 6 months. So probation period basically is for, let's say you have hired a full-time employee, but before a full-time or permanent employee, but before his or her job gets permanent, the initial few months, especially 6 months, is considered as probation period, where the employee is basically learning something, adapting to the new job, and during that time, the employee is often have some limited benefits compared to a regular full-time employee. We'll skip slide number 9, and then we talked about what type of documents you need to provide to your employee according to Bangladesh labor law when you are hiring that employee. So, for instance, we say that you need to provide him or her an employment letter, ID card. Then we talked about what we mean by service book and different contents of service book. After that, in slide number 13, we talked about if we are saying that an employee is a continuous employee, that means an employee is continuously working with an organization. So, according to Bangladesh labor law, when an employee will be considered a continuous employee. So, we talked about that as well. I think we stopped here till workers registered book. According to Bangladesh labor law, every organization needs to maintain a registered book where they will include employees' day-to-day activities, for instance, his or her starting time, job starting time, clock off, clock on, and clock off time, and so on. If there is any sort of case of any incident, what type of lunch was provided by the company, those sort of regular day-to-day information will be recorded in the register book. Slide number 15, you can skip slide number 15. So we will start with slide number 16 mainly. So from today, we will start with slide number 16. Again, in slide number 16, there is not much to understand. Basically, it says in certain cases, employees can encash their unavailed leave. That means, according to Bangladesh labor law, employees are entitled to certain type of leave. For instance, in a year, employee can get 14 days of sick leave. Employees are entitled of earned leave. That means earned leave means, let's say for every 18 days you are working, you will earn one leave. প্রতি 18 দিন কাজ করার জন্য আপনি একটা করে লিভ জমবে আপনার রেকর্ড employment recordে, and then you can avail those leaves. Now let's say employee has some unavail leave. আপনার অনেকগুলো লিভ আছে যেগুলো আপনি ইউজ করেননি. So in that case, In many cases, if employees want, they can encash those unavailable leave. তার মানে আমি লিভ নেইনি, তার পরিবর্তে আমি কোম্পানির কাছ থেকে টাকা নিতে পারবো। So এখানে বলা আছে if any worker is separated from the service due to retrenchment, discharge, termination, excuse me, একটা মিনিট একটু সময় দিবেন আমাকে। I'm extremely sorry. So যেটা বলছিলাম, let me get back to the slides. So it says that if any worker is separated from the service due to retrenchment, discharge, termination, dismissal, retirement, resignation, or any other reason, and if there is any annual leave is due to him, employer as per the provision of this law pay him the wages which would have fallen due to him during such leave. That means, let's say, we will talk about what we mean by retrenchment, discharge, termination, dismissal. We will talk about those. But basically, either it is retrenchment, discharge, termination, dismissal, whatever, retirement. Basically, employee is leaving the company. So let's say when an employee is leaving the company before due time usually. In that case, let's say there are certain unavailable leave from the employee's end. In that case, if the employee wants, he or she can encash those unavailable leave. একটা employee কোন কারণে চাকরি ছেড়ে চলে যাচ্ছে, সেটা যে কারণে অনেকগুলো রিজন বলা আছে, আমরা ওই রিজনগুলো একটা একটা করে পরে পড়বো। বাট যে কারণেই হোক, একটা এমপ্লয়ি যদি চাকরি ছেড়ে চলে যায়, ওই সময় তার যদি তার আগে সে লেটসে 5 বছর কাজ করেছে এবং ওই 5 বছরে তার অনেকগুলো আনএভেইলড লিভ আছে, তার লিভ নেওয়ার কথা ছিল কিন্তু সে লিভ না নিয়ে ওই কাজ করেছে, তাহলে সে যাওয়ার সময়, চাকরি ছেড়ে যাওয়ার সময়, ওই সময় সে চাইলে ওই লিভগুলোর পরিবর্তে একটা ইকুইভ্যালেন্ট টাকা সে কোম্পানির কাছ থেকে নিয়ে যেতে পারবে। That's what the main idea is. কোনো question so far? Okay. If not, slide number 17 talks about death benefit. According to Bangladesh labor law, let's say there is an employee who worked for 3 years in a company, and after that, that employee died after working for 3 years for some reason. Maybe it was a natural death. It's just that employee died. In that case, the worker, or let's say the worker's family, will be entitled to get the benefit of 30 days of wage for every completed year or 6 months. So let's say there is an employee who worked for 3 years and then he or she died. Now the employee's family will get 30 days wage for every completed year. তার মানে যদি 1 বছর কাজ করে, 1 বছর কাজ করলে 30 দিনের বেতন পাবে, 2 বছর কাজ করলে 60 দিনের বেতন পাবে, 3 বছর যদি কাজ করে মারা যায় তাহলে 90 দিনের বেতন পাবে। তো এরকম করে হোয়াটএভার, কিন্তু এটার জন্য মিনিমাম 3 ইয়ার্স কাজ করতে হবে। যদি 3 ইয়ার্স কাজ না করে তারা কোনো কারণে মারা যায়, in that case this benefit won't be applicable to that employee. However, if the employee has worked at least for 3 years or more, and then for some reason the employee died, then the employee's family will get some sort of financial benefit. And financial benefit কিভাবে কাউন্ট করা হবে? It will be 30 days wage for every completed year. That means আপনাকে প্রতি 1 বছর কাজ করার জন্য, আপনি গত 1 বছর কাজ করেছেন, সেটার জন্য আপনাকে 1 মাসের বেতন দেওয়া হবে। So that's the policy for death benefit according to বাংলাদেশ লেবার ল। এই জিনিসটা একদম ভালো করে কিসের জন্য কখন নেওয়া হবে এটা খুব ভালো করে মনে রাখবেন। এটা থেকে কেস রিলেটেড কোয়েশ্চেন আসতে পারে বা আপনার ছোট কিছু কোয়েশ্চেন আসতে পারে। এটা আসলে মনে রাখা ছাড়া খুব একটা বুঝার কোনো জিনিস নেই। দেয়ার আর সার্টেন থিংস স্পেশালি এই চ্যাপ্টারটাতে যেগুলো কিছু প্রভিশন আপনাকে বা কিছু রুলস রেগুলেশন আপনাদের কিন্তু মনে রাখতে হবে। তো এটা এরকম ভালো করে মনে রাখবেন যে মিনিমাম 3 বছরের কন্টিনিউয়াস সার্ভিস দিতে হবে। আফটার গিভিং at least 3 years of continuous service, if the employee dies, in that case the employee's family will get some sort of financial benefit, and the financial benefit will be 30 days wages for every completed year. Okay, so in next few slides we will talk about certain firstly two things. We will talk about the difference between work stoppage and closure, and then we will talk about different type of process where an employee is leaving the company or employee is being terminated. So we will talk about this one by one. So firstly, we have to understand the difference between work stoppage and closure. Work stoppage basically means that for a temporary period, the company is closing down and the employer is saying that there will be no work for certain reason. Usually in the event of such stoppage, uh, the employer will issue a notice and inform it is the employer's right, it's the employer's responsibility that they will inform all the employees. And in certain cases, if someone has to come, if let's say some limited employee will have to come during the work stoppage, how they will be paid, employee will get paid. And so it is the company or the employer is closing down the factory for a temporary period. Usually কি কেসে এরকম ওয়ার্ক স্টপেজ হতে পারে? For instance, there is a event of fire or disaster or let's say breakdown of machinery. তার মানে আপনার কোম্পানিতে হঠাৎ করে কোনো আগুন লেগে গিয়েছে, এটার কারণটা ঠিকঠাক করতে যতদিন সময় লাগে ওই সময় পর্যন্ত আপনি আপনার অফিস বা আপনার ফ্যাক্টরি বন্ধ রাখবেন। অথবা লেটস সে যে মেশিনে কাজ করা হচ্ছে, মেশিন কোনো কারণে নষ্ট হয়ে গিয়েছে সব মেশিন, সেটা রিপেয়ার করা না পর্যন্ত আপনি আপনার কাজ বন্ধ রাখবেন। এই টাইমগুলোকে ইউজুয়ালি ওয়ার্ক স্টপেজ বলা হচ্ছে। So the employer is keeping the factory closed for a temporary period. On the other hand, closure is basically when the employer is closing down the workplace for an indefinite period. বলে দিচ্ছে না কতদিনের জন্য, এবং kind of usually in these cases closure তখনই করে, let's say there is an illegal strike, employees are on strike but for an illegal reason, for an illogical reason. So in that case the employer has the right to close down the factory. এরকম কিছু হয় যে এমপ্লয়ার স্ট্রাইক করছে এবং এমপ্লয়ার প্রুফ করতে পারবে যে এমপ্লয়ার যে কারণে স্ট্রাইক করছে দ্যাটস কমপ্লিটলি ইলিগাল। ইন দ্যাট কেস the employers can or the company can close down their factory for an indefinite period of time. এখান থেকে এই স্লাইডটাকে এতটুকু মনে রাখলেই হবে। তাহলে জাস্ট স্টপেজ কখন হচ্ছে? ফর ইউজুয়ালি ফর reasons that is beyond the employer's control. Fire is, let's say আপনার কোম্পানিতে কোনো ফায়ার ইনসিডেন্ট হয়েছে, that's beyond the employer's control. But আপনার ক্লোজার তখনই হবে usually for employee related reason. Again, it is usually beyond the employer's control, but in this case employees are usually responsible for closure. এতটুকু পর্যন্ত আমাদের কারো কোনো কোয়েশ্চেন, কোনো সমস্যা, কোনো কিছু আছে কিনা?
No, ma'am.
আচ্ছা প্লিজ একটু মেক শিওর করবেন আমি যখন কোনো স্লাইড বাদ দিয়ে দিচ্ছি প্লিজ নোট ডাউন করে রাখবেন যে এই স্লাইডগুলো স্কিপ করা হচ্ছে এই স্লাইডগুলো আপনাদের কুইজ হোক মিড টার্ম হোক কোনো কিছুর জন্য অ্যাপ্লিকেবল থাকবে না Okay, so if you remember in this slide, we talked about different approaches of terminating an employee. So there was retrenchment, discharge, termination, dismissal, retirement, and resignation. So we will talk about this one by one and how these are different from one another. So the first one we have is called layoff. Here we are terminating employee. We are making the employee leave the company. Layoffs are usually when the employer is failing or refusing to employ any worker due to shortage of resources or raw materials or due to financial crisis. So let's say there are, for certain reasons, if the employer says that I am unable to maintain this group of employees, I am unable to pay these employees anymore, and that's why I am terminating this employee, that will be known as layoff. তার মানে এখানে employee কোনো ভুল নাই, but employer doesn't have the financial capability anymore to entertain or to, let's say, pay the employees. It could be the company is going through some sort of financial loss. It could be um, the employer does not have enough raw material to run his or her company. That's why he will have to close down this company. In that case, so it is usually the owner's or the employer's limitation. For that, the owner cannot maintain his or her company anymore. And in such cases, if the employers are letting the employees go off the company, usually in that case, that will be known as layoff. Layoff কেন বলা হচ্ছে যে এটাকে বাংলায় অনেক সময় ছাঁটাই বলা হয় আপনি যদি কখনো বাংলাদেশ লেবার লটা এক্স্যাক্টলি দেখতে যান এই layoff-কে বাংলায় এক্স্যাক্টলি ছাঁটাই বলা হয় that means the employee didn't do anything wrong but the employer doesn't have the financial capability to maintain the workforce anymore and hence they are terminating the employee. That type of termination will be known as layoff. You can skip slide number 21. Next we have retrenchment. Retrenchment, again, one kind of termination where you are terminating an employee. After an employee usually, retrenchment is a kind of a termination due to redundancy. That means you have, as a company, you have more employees than you need. Let's say in your company, if you have 100 employees, that will be sufficient for your company. But let's say you have 150 employees. So after the additional 50 employees, you don't need them anymore. So when you are terminating them based on redundancy, তার মানে আপনার প্রয়োজনের চেয়ে বেশি employee আছে. That's what redundancy is. So in case of redundancy, when you are terminating an employee or a group of employees, that type of termination will be known as retrenchment. Please এই প্রত্যেকটা ডিফারেন্স ভালো করে মাথায় রাখবেন layoff হচ্ছে the company needs the employee but the company doesn't have the financial capability to maintain those employees. That's why they are terminating them. In case of retrenchment, there are more employees than the company needs. Company যতটুকু দরকার তার চেয়ে বেশি আছে. That is, and when we are terminating employee, in that case, that will be known as retrenchment. Slide number 23 এর দরকার নেই এতটুকু পর্যন্ত আমাদের কারো কোনো কোশ্চেন আছে প্লিজ একটু মেক শিওর করবেন এটা অনলাইন ক্লাস আমি আপনাদের চেহারাও দেখতে পাচ্ছি না তো আপনারা যদি কোনো কিছু না বলেন আমি কিন্তু বুঝবো না যে আপনারা কোনো সমস্যা হচ্ছে আর তাছাড়া মিডের খাতা দেখেছি, মিডের অবস্থা কিন্তু এত খুব একটা ভালো না। তো প্লিজ মেক শিওর করবেন যে আপনারা ফাইনালে ভালো করছেন, আদারওয়াইজ আপনারা সাফার করবেন। এন্ড এটার জন্য সবচেয়ে ইম্পর্টেন্ট জিনিস হচ্ছে ইউ আর লেটিং মি নো যে আপনাদের কি প্রবলেম ফেস করছেন। ইফ ইউ আর নট লেটিং মি নো, I won't be, even if I want to, I won't be able to help you guys. So এখানে আমরা যে জিনিসগুলো পড়ছি, beat, layoff, retrenchment, next we will talk about discharge. Usually আমি আপনাকে এরকম একটা কোয়েশ্চেন দিতে পারি যে ডিসকাস ডিফারেন্ট টাইপ অফ এমপ্লয়ি টার্মিনেশন অ্যাকর্ডিং টু বাংলাদেশ লেবার ল, অথবা আমি আপনাকে এই নামগুলো উল্লেখ করে বলে দিতে পারি যে এগুলো আপনাকে ডিফাইন করতে হবে। You need to understand what we mean by layoff, you need to understand what we mean by retrenchment and so on. Now, so in slide number 24, we are talking about discharge. Again, it is where an employee is leaving the company. In case of discharge, what is happening? An employee is leaving the company, or we are terminating an employee on the ground of inability or incapacity because of ill health. So, আপনি আপনার এমপ্লয়িকে চাকরি থেকে বের করে দিবেন because the employee is not being able to do the work because of some sort of physical limitation. While she continuously অসুস্থ থাকছে, or let's say the employee met with an accident and then become disabled, and that's why he or she cannot perform his or her duties anymore. In these cases, if you are terminating an employee, that termination will be known as discharge. মানে একটা এমপ্লয়ি তার কোনো অসুখের কারণে অথবা কোনো প্রকার অ্যাক্সিডেন্টের কারণে যদি কোনো প্রকার ডিসএবিলিটি হয় and you have to terminate that employee, that sort of termination will be known as discharge. So far we have learned about 3 types of termination: layoff, retrenchment, and discharge. Usually, when you are discharging an employee, in slide number 25, there is some sort of compensation associated with discharge. So, let's say you are discharging an employee and that employee worked for at least 1 year with you. So, in that case, the employee will get 30 days of wage for every completed year. এটা অনেকটা সেম অ্যাজ ডেথ বেনিফিট। আপনারা যদি মনে থাকে আমরা কিছুক্ষণ আগে একটা ডেথ বেনিফিট করে আসছিলাম, that if an employee dies, in that case his or her family will get 30 days of salary for every 1 year an employee has worked for the company. This is same case for discharge as well. If you are terminating an employee because an employee's physical limitation or illness, in that case, while terminating the employee, the company will have to give some additional compensation to the employee. And that compensation will be 1 month salary for every year that employee worked. If the employee has worked for 1 year, সে 1 মাসের বেতন additional নিয়ে বের হবে। If the employee has worked for 2 years, that employee will leave with 2 months salary, additional salary. If the employee has worked for 3 years, the employee will leave with 3 years additional salary and so on. Okay, so next we have dismissal. In this case, again, it's a form of termination where you are terminating an employee, but this time, employee is at fault. Employee has done something wrong, and that's why the company is dismissing the employee. In that case, usually there is no prior notice. Employee কিছু একটা ভুল করেছে, and for that, the employer or the company has the right to instantly dismiss or terminate the employee. Now, what type of misconducts will be considered for dismissing an employee? এখন আপনি এমপ্লয়ি কোন ধরনের ভুল করলে একটা কোম্পানি তাকে ডিসমিস করার রাইট থাকে, লেবার ল এগেইন specifically defines those. So in slide number 27, we have listed certain misconduct or behavior or activity by an employee that can lead the company to dismiss the employee. For instance, let's say if the employee is involved in insubordination. I think আপনারা এই insubordination টা আপনাদের যদি মনে থাকে এটা আপনাদেরকে 301 এ পড়ানো হয়েছে. Insubordination basically means subordinate means there is a boss and the people who are working under a boss, that person is known as the subordinate. Now, as a subordinate, I have certain responsibilities. For instance, I have to abide by my boss's instruction. Our boss আমাকে যে instruction দিবে সেটা আমাকে follow করতে হবে. Or for instance, I cannot publicly criticize my boss. I cannot let's say be openly rude or I cannot openly misbehave with my boss. So there are certain things I have to maintain as a subordinate. However, if I am not fulfilling the duties or responsibilities of a subordinate, then it is a major ground for which the company can dismiss an employee. একটা employee যদি তার subordination duty properly fulfill না করে, in that case, the company can dismiss an employee. Next, theft, fraud, and dishonesty. If the employee gets involved in any kind of thief, money laundering, any kind of thief or fraudulent within the company has the right to instantly dismiss the employee. Or let's say taking or giving bribes. I believe you already understand what you mean by taking or giving bribes. So in that case, the company can dismiss an employee. Or habitual absence without leave. আপনি properly leave না নিয়ে 2 দিন পর অফিসে গায়েব হয়ে যান, অফিসে আসেন না. In that case, the employer can dismiss the employee. Habitual late attendance. You are constantly late at work. Even in that ground, the company can dismiss an employee. Or let's say habitual breach of any rule. So of course, if you are breaking any rule for the first time, the company will give you second chance. But if you are again and again breaking rules of the company, on that ground, the company can dismiss an employee. Or violent or disorderly behavior. If you are getting involved in any sort of violent behavior within the workplace, the company has the right to dismiss the employee. Or habitual negligence of work. আপনি আপনার যা কাজ responsibility দেওয়া হয়েছে, you are being negligent in your work. Again, in that ground, your company can dismiss you. Or frequent repetition of work on which fines can be imposed. এমন কিছু ভুল কাজ করছেন যেখানে আপনাকে বারবার ফাইন করা হচ্ছে, মানে একটা কাজে আপনি either you are not doing your job properly, you are being negligent in your job. In that case, you can be dismissed on that ground. Or let's say you have got involved in an illegal strike. আপনি স্ট্রাইক করছেন এবং এমন কোনো কারণে স্ট্রাইক করছেন যেটার কোনো লিগ্যাল বেসিস নেই. Again, in that case, the employee can instantly dismiss an employee. And lastly, falsifying or tempering official document. আপনি আপনার কোন অফিশিয়াল ডকুমেন্টে মিথ্যা কথা দিলেন, মিথ্যা রিপোর্ট বানিয়ে দিলেন. If it is proven, then the employer has the right to dismiss the employee. তাহলে এইটা খুব ভালো করে পড়বেন. ডিসমিস বলতে কি বোঝায় এবং বাংলাদেশ লেবার ল অনুযায়ী ডিসমিসালের গ্রাউন্ডস কি কি, এটা স্লাইডটা খুব ভালো করে কোশ্চেন আনসারের জন্য পড়বেন. Any questions so far? You can skip slide number 28. So we have two other approaches where an employee is leaving the company. One is resignation and last one is retirement. Again, last bole rakhi slide number 31 apni skip kore jete paren. So in slide number 29 we have resignation. I think eta apnara more or less resignation er kotha age onek শুনেছেন. Resignation is when an employee is leaving the company. So the employee doesn't want to be in the company anymore and he or she is willingly leaving the company. That's what resignation is. Usually for a permanent worker, he or she can resign by providing a proper resignation letter with a 60-day notice in writing to the employer. Resignation দেয়া মানে এরকম না যে as an employee, yes, you have the right to leave the company anytime you want, but usually you have to give a 60 days notice. আপনি যদি আপনার কোম্পানি ছাড়তে চান, আপনার এমপ্লয়ারকে আপনাকে 2 মাসের or 60 days এর একটা নোটিশ দিতে হবে. Let's say you want to leave the company in September. So you have to provide the notice to your employer in July that you want to leave the company in September. However, in some cases, if in any circumstance where if you're in a circumstance or situation where it is not possible for you to give a prior notice, in that case, your 2 months salary will be deducted, or you have to give at least 2 months salary before leaving the company. So আপনি as an employee যদি আপনি 2 মাসের নোটিস না দিয়ে চাকরি ছেড়ে চলে যান, সেই ক্ষেত্রে আপনাকে আপনার 2 মাসের ইকুইভ্যালেন্ট টাকা আপনার এমপ্লয়ারকে দিয়ে তারপর আপনাকে রিজাইন করতে হবে. That's usually the process of resignation. And finally, we have retirement. So again, I believe we all understand what retirement is. Retirement is an employee is being terminated from the company because of he or she has reached the natural age of retirement. তার বয়স হয়ে গিয়েছে, বয়স হয়ে যাওয়ার কারণে একটা certain time for যত বছরই সে সার্ভিস দিয়ে থাকুক না কেন, after a certain period of time, he or she will have to retire from the company. So usually this is that the age is 57. So according to Bangladesh labor law, this year is 57. So if you are, let's say you are working in a company and now you are 57 years of age, so you will have to retire from the company. And usually when you are retiring, there are various retirement benefits available to the employee. For all the years the employee worked in the company, there are various retirement benefits available to the employee when he or she is retiring. Any question, any confusion, anything? কোনো সমস্যা, কোনো কিছু আছে?
ম্যাম আমাদের আবার একটু বলবেন কি কি স্লাইডগুলো স্কিপ করতে হবে?
জি। So slide number 31, let me go backwards. Slide number 31. Slide number 28. Slide number 23. Slide number 21. Slide number 15. Slide number 9. Yes, that's it. So then it was the very first chapter for our final exam. এই চ্যাপ্টারটা অলরেডি আপনাদের গুগল ক্লাসরুমে দিয়ে দেয়া আছে, সো আপনারা ওখান থেকে চ্যাপ্টারটা অ্যাক্সেস করতে পারবেন. Before we end today's class, ইম্পর্টেন্ট জিনিস বলে নেই, সেটা হচ্ছে যে আপনাদের